Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, we learn how Joe used an extra year of school to get a master's in accounting in order to get another shot at recruiting and how he was able to land a relevant position to investment banking and capital markets advisory at a Big Four right out of school. Listen to hear how he was then able to make a successful transition to the healthcare group at Jefferies, where he stayed for 2 years, what he learned in his short 7-month stint after lateraling to Rothschild's restructuring group, and eventually how he ended up working in corporate development, making well into mid-six figures in his early 30s. During this chat, Joe kept harping on one thing that helped him pave his own path, and I don't think it will surprise any of you. Enjoy. All right, Joe, welcome to the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you for having me.
So it'd be awesome if you could just give the listeners a short summary of your bio.
Sure. So we'll go in reverse order here. Currently, I'm working as a vice president in corporate development at a women's health PPM, sponsored backed by Ares. Prior to joining Unified, I spent about 5 years, almost 6 years in investment banking at various firms, which include Jefferies, Rothschild, and E&Y Capital Partners. I actually started my career at PwC in a capital markets group that they had just started, that has since dissolved. But that's basically how I started in the finance world before I moved on to Jefferies.
Cool. And then, so when you were an undergrad, was finance always on the radar? When did you kind of think, oh, I'm going to go this finance route? And was investment banking even on the radar then, or did you find out about it kind of later in the game, or what?
Yeah, actually, corporate restructuring was kind of the goal at first. I had an uncle who was a pioneer in corporate restructuring, worked on a lot of in-court bankruptcies, and he was kind of a mentor to me. He went to Villanova as well. So that's something I was interested in doing when I was younger. When I got to Villanova, investment banking was a little bit more of a sexier job, a little bit less gloomy than restructuring. So that was something that was heavily recruited on campus. So it just kind of piqued my interest, and that was kind of the route changer there. Do you remember specifically, like, did you have an internship sophomore or junior year that kind of shaped that decision, or did you basically kind of always think, okay, I'm going to go into capital markets specifically, or, what was the thought process of where you applied and the hit rate or the lack of hit rate? Because I know when I applied back at Williams, I applied to 20 on campus, resume drops. I probably got 10 first rounds, three final rounds, and one offer actually at Rothschild restructuring. So what was it like for you, and how did that kind of evolve? So when I was in college, it was actually in the year of the big financial crisis. So we went from having a lot of banks on campus to basically zero. So I kind of went a pretty unorthodox route. Just to kind of I worked at actually AIG for 2 years as an underwriter for an internship. Got a full-time offer there. I wasn't really satisfied with that, so I actually stayed on to Villanova for an extra year to do my master's in accountancy, which then opened up a lot more doors for me, because then at that point the market had turned around a bit, and there was a lot more kind of targeted recruiting to some of our masters in accounting and masters in finance programs, and I just wind up falling into one at PwC. I was doing an externship there, which is part of the Masters in Accounting program. And they happen to be starting a new group within their capital markets team, which is their investment bank. They had started a new group that had recruited some folks from various bulge bracket banks to basically try to kick off this capital markets advisory practice, which I interned with and wound up liking it. So they had hired me right out of the program.
Cool. Do you recommend that if we go through a global pandemic or a global financial crisis, do you recommend taking an extra year and getting the master's for a lot of kids like right now thinking about, hey, should I go get a master's? Do you think that's a good
Yeah,
place
I
to
would
hide
say
out?
I absolutely do. I actually have another friend that did the same thing. He didn't get the looks he wanted right out of school for investment banking, and he wound up taking an extra year and did a second degree and wound up landing an internship just via networking and just having a little bit more time and focusing on what he wanted to do with Bank of America and their healthcare group, which is obviously a very strong group. So,
Yeah, and so when you were like actually thinking about this additional year and it was a master's, correct? In accounting?
yeah.
When you were thinking of that, what was the like when did you finally make that decision? It was like junior year leading to senior and you didn't have the right internship that you wanted, or what was like that final moment you're like, okay, I'm just going to do an extra year? Like at what?
Yeah, I think, nowadays it's a little bit more structured where folks and kids coming into school realize they need to have a sophomore and junior internship at a certain bank. That's the highest hit rate for for having that turn into a full-time job. That wasn't really as structured when I was in school. It was like internships weren't necessary. We're talking 10, 15 years ago now. But obviously they were still prominent, and you could still do an internship somewhere else and get another job. So it wasn't as structured as it is today.
Yeah.
I would say probably my senior year when I started interviewing for banks, a lot of the deterrents and the negs that I would get were basically I didn't have any internship experience that directly related to investment banking. So I was kind of at a disadvantage.
Yep.
So I just kind of took it upon myself to figure out what it is that I needed to do. And really the key was modeling experience. I had some of it. It was more educational than obviously in practice.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I thought would make more sense to get a kind of a deeper knowledge base in would be the statements and how they flow together, which is why I chose accounting, even though I have an undergrad in finance and accounting.
Mm-hmm.
So I just chose accounting over finance just because that was just more, I thought it made more sense for me. And that's where I felt like I was weaker. That's really the only rationale I chose accounting over a master's in finance.
Cool. So like you're coming into senior year, you weren't getting the jobs you wanted or the offers you wanted. So you're like, I'm just going to re-up, do another year and have another crack at like networking and stuff like that. So how did you approach like that networking? Were you, at this point, it was 2012-ish probably, were you like just attacking LinkedIn or was it not big enough then? How were you just like doing all of that?
Yeah. The first place I went to was like friends, family, and then just basically went to the database that Villanova had at the Career Center and just probably sent, call it 250 emails a week to various folks, and got like a 2% hit rate of people answering, and then it was mostly people saying thanks for reaching out, but I can't help you. But it takes a lot of persistence for sure. But I think once you have your story right, once you're focused on what it is that you want to do, it's a lot easier to narrow it down who you should be networking with.
What was your story? What was your pitch kind of coming into that? You're like, oh, I'm getting a master's in accounting. I'm strong here and I'm strong. I know what I want to do now, blah, blah, blah. Or what was your pitch?
Yeah, it was just, that's basically it. It was just like, hey, I'm really interested in doing this. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do going through school, but like after, a few internships and obviously like a couple of hurdles that we had to jump over because of the situation with the market, the job market's opened up now. I just wanted to see what was available if you were interested in chatting with me. And then, every once in a while I'd get a couple, first round interviews and, I got my ass kicked on a couple of the first ones, and I learned quickly that it's all about reps, right? You kind of get embarrassed your first couple of times you do it, and then you realize like how studying for these interviews are like studying for a midterm or a final, right? You really have to be prepared. So I made sure I was prepared anytime I had the opportunity. But one thing I learned,
I bombed many an IB interview. I didn't know.
One piece of advice for sure is that it's a lot easier to get a job, especially an entry-level job, when you're still in school. So that's why I encourage kids, if they're not ready if they're not really sure what they're doing, and they've kind of figured it out a little too late, it doesn't hurt to get an extra degree or stay an extra year if you can feasibly afford it, because it just opens up a lot more doors, and you can kind of spend that year focusing on not only another degree, but focusing on networking and you won't have your student loans coming in and all that other nonsense and all that noise that you need to deal with. So it's just a way to kind of to keep yourself in the hunt.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me a little bit about that that year. So you said you're sending about 200, 250 emails a week to mostly alums and other people. You're getting about a 2% response rate. Sounds about right. And a
Yeah.
lot of them were like, no, sorry. But did those networking efforts did that lead to the actual offer at PwC, or what was the actual breakthrough? Was it through friends, through family? What was it?
No, it actually did. I had reached out to one of the guys who was very high up at PwC, and he was kind of leading the effort to start this capital markets advisory group, which was part of the corporate finance team. He kind of oversaw that group, but he worked in the LLP. So it was interesting, and we kind of hit it off. He was a very big Villanova advocate. He's very high up at PwC, and he kind of was the decision maker there.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of just, jumped over a couple of hurdles there, and was kind of put at the front of the line, and was introduced to the guys who'd be running that group there. And, it just wound up working out pretty well.
Interesting. So yeah, you were there for about a year. Tell me a little bit about kind of how you started thinking about, okay, I'm in this capital markets advisory business at a big four. Tell me about how you thought about investment banking at like a boutique, and why you jumped, or when you started kind of prepping for that jump.
Yeah, I mean, I can credit a lot of it to the guys that I worked for. They were pretty good mentors. They had all worked at large bulge bracket banks or kind of elite boutiques. So when we spent a lot of time working together, they kind of knew that I was hungry and I was willing to work hard. And, they gave me opportunities to go and do modeling training via a third party, which wasn't available at PwC. And, some kind of outside forces were causing the group to shake up a little bit. That was completely out of my control. It's just, there was a lot of headbutting with the guys that were hired in the group and the guys and the legacy guys at PwC. So as the writing was on the wall there, some of those guys were leaving. They were like ready. They were nice enough to pull me aside and say, hey, this isn't working out for us. Yeah. We're going to leave. So, we want to, we think you make a really good analyst at a more traditional investment bank and program, and we think you benefit from that. So they kind of gave me free reign to leverage their networks and leverage my own, and just leverage what I've learned over the couple of years, or over the couple of months in the year I was there, which you don't realize how much you learn when you put your head down for a year and you pick it back up, and you're in an interview and stuff just starts pouring out of your mouth that you had no idea you've obtained. And yeah, when I actually got a few offers, and Jefferies Healthcare, which is a very strong group, and it was through that networking that I did actually prior to taking the job at PwC that I stayed in touch with one of the guys at Villanova that happened to know my uncle, and he actually didn't have a job for me, but he ran into a guy that he goes down to the Jersey Shore in the summer, and he happened to be next to this kid on the beach, and he worked at Jefferies, and they hit it off, and he told him about me. So it was really cool how everything came together. So you never know, even though if you network with somebody and they might not have something for you, but if you make a good impression, and you kind of just you're a genuine person, and you seem like you'd be a hard worker. You don't know what kind of network they might have, and they might not be able to leverage for you. So it actually worked out well. And that guy I still talk to, every 6 months. We stay in touch. It's just kind of it's a two-sided relationship. When his son needed some help and he wanted to get into investment banking, he didn't really have the contacts like I did anymore, and I was able to help him out. So it's just it's a give and take. It's nice. All about properly networking, and I just kind of got very good at it. So
nice. Yeah. So tell me about where you think you kind of were struggling the most when you first started networking, and then kind of what made you more comfortable. Obviously, you get better at interviews, you get better at the technicals, and like you said, after a year working, it's much easier because things you start talking about deals you were on, and it's just easier. But
yeah, of course.
How could kids do before they had that deal experience, before they have any of the full-time experience? What could they do to get more comfortable? Just reps, or is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, reps is obviously the best way to do that. I mean, your first interviews are always going to be educational. I would say take a step back and don't memorize the things that you're basically trying to retain. It's actually learning, because what happens is if you start regurgitating things that walk me through how you get to EBITDA, walk me through evaluation, all that. if they realize that you're just regurgitating, they're going to start pulling different pieces. And it's like, if one thing moves, what moves? So it's really understanding what pieces move. But I think honestly, nothing more than reps. I mean, you're going to get some pretty obscure questions and things you're not going to know, and it's okay not to know. One thing I learned is just don't just spit out an answer. It's just be confident and say that you may not know, and they'll get back to them or whatever it is. Same thing in real life when that applies. You don't want to say something that's wrong. You'd rather say something that you just admit that you don't know and be genuine. It seems to go a lot longer than just making up an answer and just getting all flustered. But yeah, I think unfortunately reps is just, even if it's a job you may not want or it may not be your first job, as many reps as you can get, as many interviews as you can get, you're going to learn a lot from every interview. Just like life, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to learn from them. That's it took me probably 10, 15 interviews until I was like comfortable with, and of course like a year of work experience, which I kind of took upon myself to spin it the way I wanted to sound, and it worked. So.
How did you spin like a capital markets advisory role to be more attractive to banks for those looking to make a similar transition, like to a healthcare, to like an actual product or an industry group rather?
I focused on a lot of the training that I did. That was educational, but I took that modeling training course that I focused on that, and there was a lot of modeling in practice. It was a little bit more esoteric than just like a traditional DCF or something like that. So I focused on the deals that I worked on, and just made sure that what I had on my resume was truthful to what I did. For a lot of entry level jobs, as long as you kind of seem like you have some sort of business acumen, and sort of like finance knowledge, that could be leveraged into training, especially for the bigger banks where they have formal training programs.
Right.
What you don't want to do is say you build DCFs all day long, and then they have you walk through a DCF, and you just kind of fall flat on your face because they're going to know you're lying. Yeah. So I was just kind of truthful in what I did, but like focused really on the finance portion of what I did, the modeling portion, the presentation building portion, and kind of just the other noise that was more like accounting heavy. I just threw that to the side.
So you kind of made your resume look a little more finance heavy than accounting. You didn't even though you had the master's in accounting, you weren't like flashing it at the top of the page or anything.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So you make it over to Jefferies. Tell me a little bit about your 2 years there. That's a crazy run for an analyst. The 2-year program is known as like 3 or 4 years of work experience, right? So tell me what that was like, just going through that and that transition from a Big Four to a boutique.
Yeah, I mean, I think the time I spent at PwC, given that I was only analyst, it kind of taught me to be a little bit more resourceful. And I was working decent hours, maybe 65 to 70 hours. So it was just prepared me to take that next step of the extra 20 or 30 hours or so. So it was a good kind of called bridge, I guess, into that world. But
you didn't think that was like brutal, like having a life after college where you're in the city working 60, 70 hours and then having to go up to 85, 90. I mean, to me, it's almost like you tasted a little bit of freedom and like fun, and then you're like thrown into it. I don't know.
Yeah,
to me,
I think that what made it a little bit more palatable was that, the group was 105 people or something like that in healthcare alone. So like 30 of them were my peers. So we were like kind of all in together, and you made a lot of good friends. You spent a lot of time together. And of course, like, nobody wants to be printing books at 4 a.m. and like shipping them to your MD at 5, and like getting him on the plane 5 minutes before like he's supposed to take off. But it's been described as like the best time you never want to do again, right? So you build these like lifelong relationships, and you build like a network of a lot of folks, but you learn so much when you're doing it. It is miserable, and I mean, there's no doubting that. But when you're working 90 plus hours a week with people that you like and your peers, and everyone's kind of in the same situation, it becomes a little bit more palatable, I think. So.
Yeah. And so then tell me a little bit about kind of the thought process as you proceeded there. I'm sure you got some great deal experience, but just tell me about like how you started thinking about your next step. And was it like after you were done with the first 12 months there, were you thinking private equity? Were you thinking corp dev? What were you, another bank? Obviously we know you ended up at another bank, but tell me about the thought process there.
Yeah. A little over probably a year, close to a year and a half in, everyone started looking into different private equity gigs, and that's just, that becomes kind of it's a tough process in itself. You're working so much and you're trying to interview, and a lot of the interview is predicated on, because you have only so much experience. So just to get your foot in the door over there, it's a lot of it's predicated on what school you went to and your GPA. So, some people are getting more looks than others, even though they may not be as experienced. So it's kind of it's a game you have to play. And I was just so busy. I was doing some interviewing for PE.
Do you feel like
sold on it?
Do you feel like your undergrad GPA held you back? If you had, I don't know what your undergrad GPA was, but do you feel like
my GPA was fine. I would say Villanova is just not a target school. I mean, I think now it's a little bit more regarded, and there's a lot more banks that are recruiting on campus now. But at Jefferies, let's say Villanova was like the bottom of the top of the school set. So we were at like the bottom rung. So you basically had, once we had the interview, we had to separate ourselves, and that's it's just kind of how life goes. The Harvard kids are going to get the first interviews, and then the Vanderbilt kids and the Virginia kids, and then the Villanova kids are lagging behind. But
did you try to actively recruit for private equity in that second year, or were you just kind of taking any?
Yeah, yes and no. I wasn't completely sold on it. One thing I did want to do was, when our group there was a lot of turnover going on at Jefferies, and it made there was not a lot of transparency from the senior guys. So a lot of the guys were either leaving to go to a different bank or going to private equity. So I just thought it was kind of the inflection point for me to, I always wanted to try restructuring. Rothschild was actively recruiting me in their restructuring group. They have a very strong restructuring practice. They sold me on a bill of goods that, didn't come to fruition, but that's neither here nor there. So it was just, I just kind of, a lot of the guys I was working with at Jefferies that I liked, seemed like they were leaving or had left. And I really wanted to focus on M&A. I started getting more like equity follow-on type deals that I didn't want to do. So it wasn't really what I was. It was kind of the work I was doing at Jefferies was really shifting, and I was working with different people, and I just wasn't as comfortable there anymore. So I just saw an opportunity to go elsewhere and try something different, thinking the grass would be greener. But it wasn't.
Well, I know I worked in the restructuring group, obviously a lot longer time ago. With the gray beard shows it, but 02 to 04, I know it was a really hardworking group back then. I assume same kind of, some of the guys were still there that we both worked. Yeah. I think we had compared notes before we first chatted, but tell me a little bit about that. So like the grass is greener, thinking you thought the lifestyle would be better, you thought the deals, or you thought restructuring would be interesting because it was just a different, like you'd get like that, I don't know, more knowledge on like different debt instrument. Like what did you think of like, oh, I'm going to go restructuring?
Yeah, I think the real focus was on the capital structure. I wanted to get like a more kind of a detailed experience and in-depth experience on the capital structure itself and different debt instruments, and just learn something different. I mean, I was kind of sold on the fact that they were starting a healthcare group and they were going to promote me and all these other things that didn't come to fruition. When you kind of got there, you realize that 7 other kids just started on the same day as you. They just couldn't stop the bleeding because kids weren't lasting more than 6 to 8 months. So it was just kind of a bunch of lateral hires that they were just trying to stop the bleeding because there was a lot of work and there wasn't a lot of people that wanted to stay. And hedge funds and distressed funds were actively recruiting kids from Rothschild 6 months out of their program. So it was easy to get out.
So kids that were coming in for a 2-year program were getting taken away within 6 months, you're saying, or 8 months?
6 to 12 months. Yeah. No, I don't think anyone I know lasted more than a year.
Back when I was there, it was 12 of us, I think. And I think there were 3 of us at the end of the 2 years, 3 or 4.
Yeah. I don't think anyone was there for the whole 2-year program. It was all lateral hires by the time like my class got in.
Wow. Well, not an easy group. Not an easy group. They do a lot of revenue and they do a lot of deals. So it's not an easy group. So tell me about like as you started realizing, because like you must have realized within a couple months, if you're out of there within 6-7 months, you must have realized within a couple months like this isn't going to work. Was it mostly like first day you're like oh shit, like everyone's lateral here? Like did that actually trigger in your head like day one, or did you realize later on like wait, nobody's actually here from the 2-year program? What kind of was like that?
Yeah, I gave it a couple months. I mean, I got put on some pretty tough deal teams, and I was, it was more the culture. Like once you spend a couple weeks somewhere, you kind of get an idea of what the culture is like, and it just wasn't didn't really jive with my personality. Jefferies was like a much more, you know, for lack of a better term, fratty environment where it's a lot more athletes and a lot more fun. It was less like white shoe, where Rothschild was much more white shoe. It was like much more of a backstabbing culture, which I wasn't used to at Jefferies. So, for my only experience was really PwC and Jefferies, and from my understanding, Jefferies Healthcare was one of the toughest groups to work for on the street. So I didn't think I would join one of the very few that were worse.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, I was about to say, like, you almost did 3 years at like two of the toughest places on the street. Like, what are you trying to like? Are you trying to like burn out early? Like, what was the deal? So okay, so you're a couple months in, and you're thinking like, okay, screw the restructuring thing. This is just crazy. Like, I'm not going to survive.
It was a combination of the people and the work. I think the work, it was a little bit gloomy for me. It was very obviously driven by the legal system and the bankruptcy courts and all this. And I just wasn't interested in that. It was a lot more reading than it was actual like modeling.
Mm-hmm.
It just really wasn't what made me tick. And again, you're dealing with people that are just upset all the time because their business is going under. And and I was working on a variety of different industries, so I wasn't really specializing in something, and I just kind of missed. Again, another inflection point for me is like I liked healthcare. I liked working with more middle market, lower middle market companies, which at Rothschild were working on much larger deals. I just did some networking again and thought, what I ultimately want to do is get back into healthcare. Whether I go to the private equity route or I go the corp dev route, I don't know, but it's get some more experience in healthcare. Jefferies was more of a broader healthcare. So I worked on some large deals. As you became a more kind of revered analyst, they went bigger deals, which I actually didn't like when I first started. They put you on the smallest deal teams and the smaller deals. I actually liked that better, working with the kind of founder-owned, more entrepreneurial companies.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to find a bank, and maybe a boutique bank, that focused more on that lower middle market space, because there was a lot more deal flow, it was a lot more underserved. You're getting more in the weeds. You're not just working for a business development team, and you're really working with the folks that built a practice or helping them build a practice.
Yeah.
So after doing some networking with folks that I worked with at Jefferies and the network that I've built thus far, there was a guy who basically was starting this group at EY in their healthcare group. He used to work with one of my old colleagues at Jefferies, I think at Citigroup, and they were looking for kind of senior associate to come on board and basically train. They had some really good analysts there that came really through the EY ranks, and they were just really smart, sharp guys, but they just didn't have that formal training, and they were a little bit raw, a little bit green as far as like building the proper presentations and proper etiquette and all that. So really, that was the mandate, was to come in and really focus on whipping the kids into shape and having them understand like things as far as building the model and presentation properly, and that's the right attention to detail all the way to like proper folder structure. So that was really it. And in doing so, part of being on that small team also allowed me to run deals by myself as I got a little bit more experience.
Mm-hmm.
And for once, that actually all of what was promised to me came to fruition. So I got a title bump. I got a little more experience. It was a little bit more entrepreneurial because I was helping build a group, and then I was kind of running meetings by myself, management meetings, working with, sitting on site at some of my clients that I was working with, helping them, build their business, making it more efficient, basically putting a bow on it so we could sell it to a sponsor.
Yeah.
Which was much, much more different than I was doing before. And I really enjoyed that experience, which when I started selling these founder-owned, and a lot of it was physician services. I was selling these large physician practices to the initial sponsor. And I realized these guys were making a ton of money. I was like, well, this is pretty interesting. I think this is actually a little bit more interesting to me than just going to be an investor at a private equity fund. I'm really getting into the weeds of building a business from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really the thought process there when wanting to move over to kind of a sponsor-backed, corporate development role, because it's just it's like killing two birds with one stone. It has a little bit of that private equity element in there, but you're working on the operational side, so you're getting kind of two different experiences.
And did you feel like
it's a lot more fast paced, and there's obviously the the equity component that every couple of years you're going to get an equity payout and all that. So it was just a little more interesting to me. That's kind of, it took me a little while to get there, but that's when I ultimately figured out that's what I wanted to do.
Cool. Yeah, let's talk about that in a little bit. But tell me a little bit about the pit stop at Rothschild to EY. Like, do you feel like that hurt you, that little pit stop, or do you feel like when you started talking to people and you were trying to jump so fast? Because I know people find themselves in that position where like they jump and then they're like, "Oh, that was a mistake."
Yeah, I think it goes back to just, you have to be open and honest and say, hey, I screwed up. This is what I did, and I was kind of pitched a bill of goods here, and it just didn't come to fruition. And and then you use that. And what I say is like, hey, just what it was a reminder that I liked healthcare, and it was that it kind of drove me to realize what it is that I actually enjoyed.
Right.
And some people will basically, tell me to go pound salt, and some people just be open to the idea. But I think once you get the right experience, it's all about networking. I think networking is the biggest driver and biggest door opener out of anything that I've ever done. It's just like, I've never had any issues with people will say, well, why would you go to these brand name banks to another one? I honestly tell people that the experience I got at EY was 100 times better than anything I had in the past, because it was real life experience that I wouldn't have got at a large bank for many, many, many years.
Yeah. Yeah. You were running deals like, and you're really only had like 2.5 years of.
Right. And it was just like, I was given as much slack as I was capable of, as opposed to just kind of being a cog in the wheel and kind of have this structured set of skills that you're allowed to do. And it was, it wound up propelling my career a lot, pretty forward pretty quickly. And I'm in a really good position where I am now, where, I'm by far the youngest person on the management team, where I am today. And I'm constantly getting calls every day for other opportunities. I would say probably 3 or 4 a week. So I mean, everything wound up working out pretty well. It's just what I consistently do is networking. That's all I do. Even when I'm not looking for a job, it's just always meeting people and always just continuously learning something new.
So I want to push on that a little bit. So like specifically the jump. So you were able to kind of overcome that little pit stop, or we'll call it a speed bump, and you like got into EY and you were doing really good work. What was the thought process of like just sticking around? Why then jump onto the like a corp dev? Why not stick around, build that group more, get up? Did you feel like you were capped more, and you saw that you said something that you saw people were making a lot of money? You meant the physicians were making a lot of money, or the private equity firms that were rolling these up were making a lot of money? Yeah,
so it was a combination of both, and there was no like shortage of deals in that space, right? So basically, what I got
a lot of runway. There was a ton of runway for that. You meant.
Yeah, exactly. And it just so happened that my managing director and partner they were getting bought out by a consulting firm at that time too. So they had gone to a consulting firm, and I was 1 year away from getting promoted to vice president. So I did some kind of soul searching and talking to some other folks and saying, like, I've heard mixed reviews about once you go to the vice president level at banking, you're kind of starting to pigeonhole yourself as an advisor. It's harder to get out. My bosses told me the same thing, and they were very supportive. And they actually pushed me that way. They said, honestly, like you're too smart to be a banker for the rest of your life. Like go work on the operating side. And they were like, the landscape of investment banking has changed over the years. If I can go back in time, like I would do that too. They said at my level, it's really hard to do. I think it's a pretty significant pay cut. You're at the perfect age to do that. So there was a lot of support to do that internally, and then I've gotten a lot of the same feedback when I'm starting to reach out to mentors and other folks in my network itself and asking that same question. So it seemed like the right move.
Cool. Can we talk about pay for a second? Like just in terms of ranges, you don't have to give us specifics, but like about the pay cuts or what you took along the way. So obviously PwC to Jefferies, I assume, was a big pay bump because you probably had a much bigger bonus initially coming up. So that was what, like 70 base for PwC, around there, 60, 70, and then it jumped to like 80-ish at Jefferies.
I think the pay structure just went up. So I came in at 80. It was 85, 90, 95 was when I came in at as a second year.
So 85-ish. So, okay. And then bonus was pretty good for you those couple of years, like around 50 to 70%, or?
Yeah, I think it was higher than that. I think my first bonus was prorated because I didn't have a full year the first one in, but it was prorated at 75,000, whatever. So
yeah, almost 100%. That's
Yeah, it
pretty
was
damn
pretty close to like
pretty
an
good
80.
for kind of your second year analyst. Okay, and then when you jumped to Rothschild, you obviously didn't get a full bonus, right? Or you didn't get any bonus, so you're kind of like,
Um,
did you get a bump
I
in
actually,
base? Like, were you a senior? Were you considered
I
a third
did.
year?
Yeah, I got a bump in base, and I was supposed to get a bump that joined right before the analyst year turned. So I was supposed to get bumped up to basically do like a half of a third year and then jump to associate, which didn't happen. And then the bonus that they promised me was like half of what they promised me. So I wasn't thrilled about that.
Oh man.
But that's
Okay, and then
not
so
exactly the best story. So
it's
not super helpful for you either.
and so the jump to E&Y. Tell me a little bit about that. I assume that's a pay cut, right? Well, I mean, maybe not because Rothschild was paying you, so wasn't paying up, but like from Jefferies
Well, I got
especially.
hired as a second year associate. So their scale was a little bit lower, but I jumped to, I think my first year was 125.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my first year bonus was 100 grand. So it wasn't,
Oh,
it was
that's
big. Yeah, it was, I
that's
mean,
pretty good for
we did
big
some
four.
pretty good deal work. And I mean, I worked out a pretty good deal with them just because we were so lean and, a lot of what I could bring to them was pretty valuable and they just didn't have the time to do it. So I got treated pretty well there.
That's awesome. Yeah, and then tell me a little bit, and then so the thought process that you see your networking, they were really encouraging to do the corp dev thing. Tell me a little bit about the process of like, okay, first off, did you have to take a big pay cut when you jumped? Um, since we're on pay, can you answer that first before we move on?
Yeah, so I negotiated a pretty good salary. So I started here at like 175. So it wasn't a pay cut from a salary standpoint. Just the bonus structure is obviously much lower.
Yeah.
So my first year, I think the bonus was like supposed to be 20%, but I kind of I think I got like something like 35% or something like that, just because I did good work and it was like pretty clear that they got me first deal. So I got promoted like within 9 months. So
Nice.
and then my salary bumped up pretty significantly. So I'm on
Yeah.
a completely different structure.
And then yeah,
And
and
I
then
got
specifically for that, so tell me about like why, like you wanted to, were you only specifically focused on going to corp dev at private equity backed companies, and then how did you find this opportunity? Even like network, you knew harping on networking. I agree, but just tell me like how you even came across this and how you knew like this was a good spot because you had already made a step before where you were promised things. How did you get more comfortable that this wasn't going to happen again?
honestly, I was just it's just really feeling the people out. You have to just kind of trust the person that is making these promises to you. Obviously, get anything you can do in writing. It's a lot easier to do that when it's in writing. But yeah, I mean, I think what I've learned is over the years, it's not just going for the job you think you want. It's like you have to really focus on the people that you'll be working with to decide whether you're going to be happy or not. And I just knew that a lot of these places that I was looking at were really rewarding folks on merit as opposed to time being there. So it was just a lot easier for me to jump forward if I did a good job. And that's, kind of how it panned out for me. So, I mean, I've been here for 2 years now. I'm on about to get my second promotion. We just signed a deal for, I got equity after my first promotion, and the deal that we just signed with a new capital partner, I'm getting my payout for that too. So,
Can you explain like how that works? Like, because I think I'm super curious because I have no clue. I never worked for I worked in private equity, but I never worked for a private equity owned business. So I don't know how the other side, people working within there and running the
yeah,
M&A within there, how that works. I know if you obviously if the PE firm sells or sells you guys, right, sells the whole piece, you guys get a payout, right? Obviously, because there's
yeah,
options.
yeah. So basically, how it works is if you get hired at a certain level, and that was one of the things that was attractive to working for a private equity backed healthcare company or any company is that if you do get equity, that there's an inevitable exit, and part of that exit, there's generally some sort of tag along right that you have and some sort of change of control that comes with that. So every couple of years, you're working for obviously you're growing. It's a growing company, so it's going to be a very deal flow heavy job, which is obviously good for getting more reps and more experience. But also every couple of years, as opposed to going to a large corp dev, your equity is actually it actually vests into cash as opposed to like some like arbitrary vesting period and some like strike price that may never happen, and you're So it was more realizing dollars. And then not only that is that if you have,
But so
I work very
so
closely.
there are just options specifically that are vesting, and the price, because you're raising new capital, new rounds at certain prices. That's basically locked in,
Yeah.
right?
So essentially, the equity is valued at whatever, like, whatever they recently did an equity value evaluation. Mine was valued at like $500,000 was my hurdle rate. So anything over that, I was in the money. And we sold for 3x that. So then some of
So
those,
you're psyched.
so could be more psyched, but so there was yeah. I mean, it depends on the structure, but a pretty like kind of vanilla structure is if if private equity sponsor A, who currently owns the practice, sells 70%, you can sell. There's a change of control right that you could sell up to the amount that they sold. So the tag along right is up to 70%, depending on how it's structured. That's like probably the most simple one. Sometimes you get like incentive units based on performance, and there's different hurdles based on MOIC. But for the most part, that's literally I got a new equity package today, and that's exactly how it was structured. Which it's incentivized by the hurdles of the MOIC, and then there's a time-based portion, and every kind of half a turn on the MOIC, I get an extra percentage.
Nice.
So it's just incentivized for us to work.
So
hard.
You're like go. They want you to just go and close deals.
Right.
No pressure. So yeah, your day to day. Tell me a little bit about that, and then we'll wrap it up. Maybe some final words of wisdom. But like day to day, anything.
Yeah, I mean, my day to day is a little.
How is it different? Yeah.
I have a really good rapport with my CEO. I currently don't. I directly report to the chief development officer, but I kind of just given the nature of like what my skill set brought to the company. So what I've learned over the years is all that work that I kind of put in investment banking is you build a skill set that you may think a lot of people have because you're always around your peers and everyone has the same skill set. But when you bring it to the real world or to the corporate world, very few people have that skill set. So it made me kind of invaluable here where I did other things outside of just traditional M&A. And when you work for these growth companies that are sponsor backed, they're generally pretty lean. So if you can wear a lot more hats if you're capable and if you kind of get in with the right people. So I do a lot of strategy stuff. I do a lot of ad hoc stuff for my CEO. I'm actually transitioning to a more strategy role after this. So
that's cool.
My day to day was really focused on obviously planting new stakes in the ground in new states. So by looking at larger practices in new states, so we can basically have a presence in a new state, and we pay a higher multiple for those, and then we basically look at smaller practices and roll them up and basically drag down the multiple. But my day to day is really focused on obviously bringing in platform deals, which are our larger deals, and then the quote unquote tuck-ins or bolt-ons, which would go into those larger regions that we bought. But then, I'd say that's probably 70% of my time doing that. And then the 30% would be the ad hoc projects, whether it be helping the finance team rebuild a budgeting model because they just didn't have the necessary skill set to do so, or my CEO liked the way I did it more than it was cleaner and it was easier to read and follow and was more dynamic. So, I'm doing something like that right now, actually, helping rebuild the budget and the restatement model. I've done things from helping HR figure out how to, pay out when we're buying a new practice, how to structure the equity piece and who gets what proceeds from. So it varies.
Cool, man.
Right?
Sounds fun. You're doing a lot of different things. Yeah. I mean, fun in the sense of like it's work, but it's you're doing some interesting stuff. It's strategy and it's a mix. So that's nice.
I mean, I'd rather be a professional athlete or a celebrity. But, there we are.
Oh man. Any other kind of final words of wisdom? Appreciate how open you've been and all the kind of steps that anything you looking back, you're like, oh man, should have done that.
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of misconception that there's like a structured path, and if you don't get into private equity after the second year, and if you don't get into like a mega fund, or like it's the end of the road for you. It's just like you can really get anywhere you want if you work hard and you network. And, I took a pretty unorthodox path. And you look back and I look at some of my friends that went the more traditional path and went to these mega funds, and now they're doing the same job I am. and they're like 3 years behind me. So you never really know what path that people might knock a brand name, but it's really about the people you work with, the experience that just make sure you understand the experience you're going to get, the people you're going to work with, and just constantly network. There's nothing more important than networking, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Awesome, man. We'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.